I'm basically turning it over to Frank. If anyone has any issues, feel free to put something in the chat and I'll try to do the best I can. And here's Frank. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Longtime member here, former president of the Philadelphia chapter, long time ago, but that's all right. I'm among the dwindling crowd of former Pennsylvania Railroad people who actually worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. You are right. Which means prior to 1968, most of my career was not in the engineer seat, but as a sales representative, looking for business to keep the railroad moving. And I worked in what was called the traffic department. That was old railroad lingo for the people who got business for the trains. But my title was sales representative. I was transferred 9 different times by the Pennsy, but the best place they ever moved me to was Louisville, or as the natives out there insist on calling it, Louisville. Louisville. When you hear the Kentucky Derby broadcast now, they're very careful to say Louisville, not Louisville, like I always pronounced it out there. I had two and a half years as a sales rep in Louisville, and I was fortunate enough to have customers who were very desirable for the railroad. They had what we called high revenue traffic. That means cigarettes, booze. That paid a lot more per car than coal, and the distilleries and cigarette companies in Louisville were very generous at giving us a lot of business. Now I may have to do, these are old slides, I may have to do some adjustments. Oh, I have a pointer to find it. The Louisville branch from Indianapolis to Louisville, 111 miles from Indianapolis to Louisville. And quite a few interesting places along the way, but a railroad coming in Indiana didn't get into Louisville unless it had a bridge to get across the Ohio River, which at this point was a mile wide. The first railroad to attempt it was called the Jeffersonville, Madison, and Indianapolis, the JM&I, which together with the Louisville and Nashville Railroad opened the bridge. Which opened the first bridge across the Ohio River at this location in 1870. The PRR leased the JM&I in 1871, which resulted in the first access that the Pennsy had into the state of Kentucky. On the Louisville side, in 1916, the government had forced the railroad to put in a new lift span to make room for all the river traffic, much of it in barges that used this use this canal here, and there was a lot of bridge traffic, barge traffic that went under this bridge. And the operator at Clag Tower, which is often left here, you'll see in a minute, was in charge of raising this bridge every time a barge tow was coming in its direction. As far as I know, at least when I was there were never any accidents or collisions. This is part of the mile-long bridge. That happens to be an Illinois Central Derby, Kentucky Derby train that was being turned on the Pennsy so that it could be backed into the central station where the IC terminated in Louisville. It was a very big bridge. The stone piers here were the original piers that were erected in 1870. But in 1916, during World War I, the railroad replaced or was forced to replace all of the steel superstructure, which were plopped down on top of the old original 1870 piers. Here you can see just how wide the river is. And it was, in 1870, it must have been a terrific task to build a bridge to span this extent. As I said, the bridge is a mile long. Well, once in a while, the Ohio River would get out of control. And as it did in March of 1964, when I was first there, there was a humongous flood that the bridge was able to withstand, but a lot of other structures couldn't. Like this yard here was completely underwater. And at the time, I was a member of the Kentucky Railway Museum, which had a lot of preserved artifacts, including a couple of steam locomotives. And it was flooded right up to the top of the boilers of one of the steam locomotives. So it was a disaster. Well, this was my headquarters, the freight station at Portland Avenue, Louisville, Kentucky. And you probably noticed it was not air conditioned. So I spent as much time out of the office as I possibly could. And right along, well, the air conditioning wasn't a problem in the winter. And we did get snow. Yes, we're in Kentucky, we did get snow. And we had a little circus ramp truck train terminal right beside the office, where we did quite a brisk business in truck train traffic. And I think the PRR just a few years before had come up with the idea of calling the service truck train, which sounded pretty good. We had a fleet of locomotives to switch all this lucrative traffic that we had. They worked partly in Louisville, small yard there at Portland Avenue, but the main freight yard was right across the river at Jeffersonville. That's where the heavy duty operations were carried out. Now I have a note on here saying on this slide that calling attention to the fact that in 1966, the Pennsy had repainted this GP7 in the old traditional paint scheme and lettering, not what was being done with most other equipment. This is our main line. And, sorry, I have difficulty handling all this equipment. This is Portland Avenue Freight Yard, which is just on the Kentucky side of the bridge. This is our main line that extended down to Union Station and connections with the Southern, the L&N, and the Kentucky and Indiana terminal. Well, here's beautiful old car that was in, obviously in track service. I knew more about passenger equipment. I could tell you what this was before, but you have to judge for yourself. But Pennsy took a lot of the old passenger equipment and converted it into work train service. This was a rarity on the Pennsy. Fairbanks Morse locomotives were pretty much a rarity. This is an H1044 built in 1949 that was still working yard service in Louisville in 1966.
Sorry, I'm not one that's cooking like this.
Yeah.
Doing something wrong.
Yeah, just hold the clips.
Okay.
And turn.
We also had fairly new equipment. These were called DF cars, damage-free cars, which were used for high revenue business like that whiskey that I mentioned before. And then we had these monstrous 86-foot cars that had just been delivered. They lasted for quite a while, but these were used especially for loads of cigarettes. And in 1966, when the dollar was worth probably half of what it is now, a carload of this stuff would have revenue of like $100,000, which was astronomical in those days for a freight car. But it was loaded with hundreds and hundreds of what do you call them? Pallets of cigarettes. I don't think they're shipping nearly as many cigarettes today out of Louisville. And yes, once in a while we'd have some fun with visiting celebrities like Holiday on Ice. Well, this is a sturdy old N6 caboose built during World War I, and here it is in 1966, still carrying on, even has the new style Pennsy lettering on it. The local crews would use these cabin cars. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting I'm speaking to a Pennsy audience.
Could you go back to that previous slide for a moment? To my knowledge, those cars were the former recreation cars from the Jeffersonian.
Really? Oh.
They were converted to Holiday on Ice tunnel cars.
Wonder if that outfit's still in business. I don't travel by rail anymore. Well, this N5 or N6, I'm sorry. I think it's N6. Any cabin car experts here? N6, does that sound right? Once in a while, the crews got a little over enthusiastic about backing their cover cars into the Portland Avenue yard. Well, here we are at the south end of the bridge. And here's Clag Tower, very key. It's still there. I mean, because it controls the bridge as well as the railroad. According to local legend, it was named Clag after some employee back in the 1890s. As far as I know, it's still known as Clag Interlocking. This is our premier train, the South Wind, which ran pretty much every other day between Chicago and Florida by way of Louisville, where the Pennsy interchanged the train to the L&N. And the L&N took it south and gave it to the Atlantic Coast Line for its final destination in Miami. But this was a very luxurious train. But you could see almost anybody's power on there. Pennsy, L&N, ACL. That is Clyde Tower. Obviously in service 24 hours a day. And here's another version of the south wind approaching with ACL power this particular day. And a northbound south wind with one of the Pensy's older stainless steel ops cars. Here's the south wind coming. This time, this is probably 1965 with a pair of L&N V6s. They still had a lot of V6 locomotives. Well, this is something that would horrify the safety people today, but in 1965, the 6 railroads in Louisville decided to run a tour for the Chamber of Commerce, members, because all of the major shippers in town were members of the Chamber of Commerce. So we said we were going to show them the railroad. And we loaded them up in these cars. There it is, Louisville Chamber of Commerce Railroad Industrial Tour. I don't know where we got this car, or it wasn't necessarily the Pennsy that did this. We participated, but probably the L&N's South Louisville shops put this equipment they got. But here's a scene that would really horrify any of our safety experts today. Here are these shippers sitting in a gon, and as far as I know, nobody fell off the train, but it made me nervous at the time. And everybody got a PRR bandana and a railroad hat. Well, another interesting thing happened in 1964. The L&N had rebuilt the legendary German locomotive of Civil War fame to celebrate the Civil War centennial in 1962. And the famous general was rebuilt and made a big tour around the railroad for a couple of years. And here it is on one of its trips coming down the Illinois Central, right along the river. And in the background, you will see the Belle of Louisville, which was a home-built, home-headquartered steamboat, a real steamboat with a paddle wheel. I was on it many times because it ran regular tourist trips up and down the river, mostly up the river towards Cincinnati. And sometimes another steamboat that was based in Cincinnati would come down and they would have races. I'm not a big steamboat buff, but it was interesting. Actually, yes.
You know, that was literally steam power?
Literally
You
steam
know, it
power.
was coal or oil?
I think it used oil.
I'm looking for a stack.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it wasn't diesel powered. I think the other one was. No, it had some kind of a steam in it. It wasn't coal, I'm sure of that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it made evening and nighttime cruises as well. This is Union Station, Louisville, built in 1891 by the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. But most of the railroads that had passenger service in Louisville used Union Station, including the Pennsy. The Illinois Central had its own station, Central Station, and the Southern Railway had its own station. But at least 5 railroads came in here, including the Monon, C&O, L&N, Pennsy. Beautiful building, it's still there. It's hard to believe it. Today it serves as the headquarters of the local transit authority in Louisville. The tracks are not there anymore, but the station is still intact. this was just one day I happened to be at the station, and the southbound south wind was backing in. All southbound trains had to back into the station. Northbound trains pulled in at first. It's just the way the configuration of tracks required. And we would also often see private cars on the tail end of that train, because it was a very classic train. Well, I'm sorry, the slide is so tall you can't see the big L&N sign on the top of the building, but this was the headquarters of the L&N Railroad right next to Union Station. Well, the local chapter of the National Railway Historical Society had its own car, which it purchased from I'm not sure whether from the Pullman Company or from the L&N, but it made many trips. It was a very good car. I rode it several times to New Orleans and elsewhere. So it was not unusual to see it on the rear of a train. We apparently had a very good relationship with the L&N. But obviously this is pre-Amtrak. We didn't have to deal with those people. Well, the L&N ran a lot of passenger trains, but they didn't always keep their locomotives freshly painted. They did have a new paint scheme, which you'll see in a minute, but some of them look pretty dilapidated. And yes, there was street running in Louisville, 4th Street. The main line from Cincinnati came right down the street. Most of the freight trains didn't go that way. They went into the yard at South Louisville, but all the passenger trains from and to Cincinnati had to use this track. Well, this was the L&N's idea of modernizing their paint scheme. And I think it was pretty nice. And you notice this is an E6, which is a very old locomotive. But in 1966, they were preparing them for many more years of service. And there they are. There's 2 E6s right there. The C&O also came into town. They had a train from Washington that ran over trackage rights on the L&N to reach Louisville. Well, I like this car. You can see the name. It's the Circumnavigators Club. All of the Pullman cars in this series had club names, like Rotary Club we used to see on the Northeast Corridor. I never saw this car actually in service, but they had a bunch of cars here that were stored for use as coaches during high traffic periods like Christmas. There's the C&O train to Richmond, and was passing through a place called St. Matthews, which is, I guess you could say St. Matthews in terms of social standing was similar to what the main line is considered in Philadelphia. It's where all the wealthy people lived, but the railroad ran right through the middle of town. Now here's another version of the South Wind with, you see it has a dome car up there. Sometimes they grab a dome car in Chicago and put it on the train. Now this is down where the L&N engine terminal is, and you can see the station in the distance. That's Union Station. So this is a northbound South Wind, which is pulled into the station locomotive first and will back out to the connection with the PRR and then proceed northward. There's another south wind. No, I don't think that's the south wind. That's probably the Pan American, one of the other trains. But with an E6 right up front. And one of the many private cars that we used to see there, you can't see it there, but the tail sign says South Wind on it. So the car owner had that specially made. There's a mixture of power. I have to think that one of the Pennsy units had failed, and the L&N had to substitute one of their own locomotives to take the train south out of Louisville. Now here's a northbound south wind at the station with the crew just getting on. They're hanging up the markers. I can tell you from personal experience with some of these crews, they didn't take any nonsense from the guys coming in off the L&M. I have one anecdote I'd like to tell. One Christmas season, the three freight sales representatives working for the PRR were sent out to Fort Knox to sell special holiday tickets to the troops who wanted to go home, because many of them would be bussed in from Fort Knox and get on the train and go to Chicago or go south. Well, one day we were down there probably 3 days before Christmas, and the south wind pulls in looking something like this, a mixture of coaches and first class Pullman cars. And we must have had 100 troops who had just gotten off of the bus, and they all wanted to go to Chicago or Indianapolis. And I said, where the heck are we going to put all these guys on this train? So my friend, Mr. George Higgins, who was a well-known PRR conductor, who his run was between Louisville and Logansport, Indiana. He's standing there and he sees this gang of troops coming up, and he said, all right, men, just get on there and go left or right, wherever you find an empty seat, sit down. Well, about 5 minutes later, the Pullman conductor comes storming back, and he said, what do you mean sending all these guys into my cars? They don't have Pullman reservation. And Higgins looked at him and said, if you don't like it, you can get off here. So Mr. Higgins was in charge of the train once it got on the Pennsylvania, not the Pullman conductor. Here's a south wind sitting in the station. And as I said, sometimes we would see a Northern Pacific or some other dome car. I didn't see it every trip, but quite often we did see them. Now this would have been a southbound train, and that pair of PRR locomotives presumably would have operated all the way to Miami, because we had this power sharing agreement with the L&N and the ACL, where their equipment could go through to Chicago and our equipment could go all the way to Miami. Now, I don't know why the Keystone had fallen off the back of that car, but we often saw it. I'm sure it was very nice inside. This is a northbound south wind. And here is northbound south wind, probably the same day, on the bridge, taken from the Indiana side. And here you can well see this vertical lift span here, which had to be raised every time a barge tow would come along, or a tourist boat, or anything that couldn't clear that under that bridge. Rail traffic would have to stop, and the bridge would be raised by the operator at Clyde Tower. Now the B&O when I was there, didn't actually have a service directly into Louisville, but their main line to St. Louis was just a little bit to the north in Vernon. So I was up there one day and saw this nice P&O observation car on the rear end of Train 1, which is the National Limited. Now we're over at Jeffersonville. This is the town directly across the river from Louisville and the site of the PRR's principal freight facility. Now there's a rarity. One of only 42 FP7s that Sandy Railroad ever had. And this is in 1967. It's already been renumbered into the Penn Central paint scheme, or numbering scheme, I should say. Originally they had a number in the 9800 series, but now it's been renumbered in getting ready for the oncoming disastrous merger that was about to happen a year later. This is the new circus ramp truck train terminal that was built in Jeffersonville to replace the little yard that we had on the Louisville side. We had pretty nice business there. We had no cranes, everything was circus style. Now this is NS7, which was our main freight train running to Chicago, or running to Louisville. And this tower is Boyd Tower, because right at this location is where the B&O main line crossed the Pennsy main line, but it was a B&O operated tower. And this is a U-25B, which had been repainted into the simpler PRR paint scheme with no lettering, just keystones all over. This was in 1966, which is not too far ahead of the coming merger. There's Boyd Tower and a string of our truck train equipment. And you notice a lot of these cabin cars still have the antennas on there for the old radio system, which had been superseded several years before. Well, by this time in 1966, the New York Central had partly abandoned its line into Louisville, which included a major bridge across the Ohio River. And they had taken trackage rights over the PRR. So this is the same location, Boyd Tower, but the nightly New York Central, the premier train, was now running on the PRR as far as Indianapolis. New York Central with a Pennsy style signal. Mike, are you there? Are you watching us? Where's that New York Central guy? Oh, there you are. You recognize that, don't you?
Many miles in them.
Well, on a very bleak day in October of 1964, this special train came to town, came to Jeffersonville. And on the rear end was a candidate for president named Barry Goldwater. Maybe some of you can remember him. And he was on a campaign train that was, I guess, going across the country. Always liked this. You may not be able to read it, but his slogan was, "In your heart, you know he's right." Well, voters didn't think so.
Is he in that picture?
I think he might be. He was in one of my pictures.
One before that. One before.
Yeah, I think he was in one of my pictures.
One.
He was a senator from Arizona at the time.
Maybe he was over his phone.
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting operation. There was a local train that ran out of Jeffersonville Yard north about 20 miles to Speed and places like that. We had a big cement customer at Speed, S-P-E-E-D. And if they had a lot of business, sometimes they would use the E7 or E8 that was laying over, having brought the night train down from Chicago in the morning, and it wouldn't go back out to Chicago until that evening. That's sometimes they'd use it as a freight unit, just to get their money out of it. And sometimes if they didn't have a Jeep to run, they'd run the E8 all by itself, backing up for 10 or 12 miles like this. I guess that's illegal. I don't know, but they did it. Well, this is the Louisville Cement Company at Speed, about 10 miles north of Jeffersonville. It's a very good customer. And you can see there's a train order board there, part-time operator. And the other railroad that served Speed was the Southern Indiana, which went over and connected with the B&O. And it always had some very interesting power. Some kind of GE unit there. And of course, the Pennsy main line is on the left. Now this is Seymour, which is about 50 miles north of Louisville. It was another crossing with the B&O, a major crossing with the B&O. In fact, there's a B&O train on the crossing. Now, as I mentioned, there was a power sharing agreement with the Pennsy, the L&N, and the Atlantic Coast Line. And sometimes the ACL power would operate through to Chicago. So here's a southbound south wind train just north of Jeffersonville, headed by 3 ACL units. Apparently they didn't have to have cab signals. I don't know how they operated them into Chicago without cab signals, but they did. This is the top of the famous or infamous Madison grade, which for many years was known as the steepest mainline railroad grade in the country, 5.89%. And it required, to operate it required the use of 2 specially equipped SD7 locomotives that had special weights on them and fuel tanks that were equipped to feed fuel with the engine, even though the locomotive might be at a severe angle going down this grade. Both of those SD7s lasted in the Conrail. I have pictures of them in Conrail paint.
What was the grade again?
5.89%. It's very steep. This is the grade taken from a highway bridge at the bottom of the grade in the town of Madison, which at one time was a fairly major seaport before Louisville took over most of the business.
A lot of sand.
Yep. I never did see a train actually operating on here. I tried several times, but they only run once or twice a week because there wasn't that much business at the bottom of the hill anymore. And there was no river business. This is at New Albany, where the PRR had a branch into New Albany, which was a couple of miles west of Jeffersonville. But we had some customers in there. The Monon and the B&O already served, and the Southern too, all already served New Albany. Where do you see this? This is a PRR branch with an active signal on it, but to my knowledge, there hadn't been a train over this track in probably 3 years. But it was built, the branch was built during World War II to serve something called the Charlestown Arsenal. And in order to get to it, the PRR had to cross the B&O main line, which you see on the left. And apparently, either the government wouldn't let the Pennsy abandon this line, or for some other reason, they didn't want to abandon it. But years after the last train ran over, it was still there, and they had to send the signal maintainers out to maintain the signal. Well, this is the worst accident that I saw during the entire time that I was at Louisville. This was a intermodal train, as we call them now, a truck train, which derailed at a place called Memphis, Indiana, about 12 miles north of Jeffersonville. And it was a real mess. Apparently the bridge just gave way. Something happened or it derailed on the bridge. I just don't remember, but it was a bad accident and had the railroad blocked for a couple of days. So they worked through the night. There was our big steam crane. And that was a bad one. And the L&N even helped out by sending their big crane up to work from the south end of the wreck. That was often done among railroads. If one railroad had a bad accident, the other railroads would step in to help. Oh, they finally got it cleaned up that night. Now,
I'm gonna go over there and sit down. Want to stay over there? Yes.
sorry, folks, I told you I was a senior citizen who actually worked for the PRR. So I can't stand for more than about half an hour at a time. This is a Kentucky Derby special train. During the 3 years that I was there, I saw many of them. Not only on the Pennsy, but on the Southern, the L&N, the Monon, the C&O. This was in a day in the mid-'60s when the Kentucky Derby was an immense sporting event. People came from all over. And this was prior to the time when a lot of people had their private jets. But the Pennsy alone, the L&N ran about 10 specials. The Pennsy ran 3, one from Chicago, one from Pittsburgh, and one from Philadelphia. This is a special from Chicago, coming down in the area around Sellersburg. It's 10 miles north of Jeffersonville. And on the end of it was a real classic. That is the Duchess, an office car built in 1890. You can see it's a wood constructions. Got those braces underneath. It was used by a gentleman named Ike Duffy, who was president of the Central Indiana Railroad, which served some fairly important customers. The Central Indiana was jointly owned by the PRR and the New York Central, but it operated independently. And if Mr. Duffy wanted to go to the Derby with some of his guests, hey, we put his car on the rear of our train. which is, I don't know, operating 50 or 60 miles an hour in that car. I'm not sure all that safe, but they did it. And here's a Derby train arriving in Louisville, still on the bridge. The power is cut off for some reason. I'm going to have to switch it, push the train into the yard. And here, the train here has pulled up onto the main line, not into Portland Avenue. Oh, I'm sorry, not into Portland Avenue Yard, where we terminated our Derby trains because we didn't want to pay the L&N to handle them at Union Station. So we put them into our own yard and then bust the people over. That gentleman there in the suit right here is a division superintendent, Bill Wieters, who I knew very well and later came to Philadelphia in a much higher job with Penn Central and then with Amtrak. He was a good guy, but being the division superintendent of the Southwestern Division, this was the biggest event on his division this particular day, so he was there to make sure nobody screwed up. Now they're bringing another train into the Portland Avenue Yard, which is just off of the main line at Clyde Tower. This is we called it Portland Avenue. It's about 14th Street in Louisville. Clyde Tower is in the far distance there. Now this train will pull in here after the conductor gets his conference finished with the police officer. The road power will cut off and the yard switchers will come on and break up the train into a couple of cuts and push them into the sidings at Portland Avenue. So what they're doing now. That is a Pennsylvania Railroad duplex car called the Connoquenessing Creek. In case you don't know where the Connoquenessing Creek is, it's out near Pittsburgh. We saw a lot of interesting power come in on these Derby specials. A lot of interesting cars, I should say. And we also had to make sure that this little freight yard was cleaned up, and you'll see later on they put down a lot of fresh stone, and because we're going to handle the paying passengers here and bus them over to see the race. Now this is which car is this? The Quaker City. So this is the Philadelphia train. Now it's because I was a sales representative, I didn't have to stay in the office all the time. That's during my career there, and that's what allowed me to run all over the Louisville area shooting train pictures. When I lost it, I never knew the difference. Because he was inebriated most of the time. So. He was later fired. But Jim Taylor, another sales rep, and I were told to stay at the station to be ready in case our customers and their hosts, their PRR hosts, needed any service. This is because they were still on the train. Some of these guys, I remember the U.S. Steel people who came on the Pittsburgh train from Pittsburgh, they never got off the train. They didn't hear anything about the race. They just wanted to be entertained on a private car. So during the whole 8-hour layover here. These guys, along with their PRR people, they'd stay on board the train and play poker. That was their entertainment. And we were supposed to be ready, if they needed it, to go to the nearest liquor store and get a couple of bottles of bourbon in case they ran out, which they did sometimes. But I mean, they were our customers. We weren't going to tell them, get off the train and go to the race. You can stay here all day if you want. That's what we're going to do. The Rotary Club, very nice parlor car, which usually could be found on trains up and down the corridor between New York and Chicago. And here it was in Louisville. There we are, unloading the passengers, getting them on buses to go to the park, Churchill Downs, it's called. I think our priority customers who are being entertained in the business are, if they wanted to go to the race, we would see that they had proper accommodations in a taxi or a van. They didn't have to get on the bus with a hoi polloi there. Now they're putting the cars together because they go out the same night. I mean, they come in the morning. The races run at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, 6:30 in the afternoon, and the trains are usually loaded up and ready to go by 10 o'clock. They get the Yates ready for the afternoon evening departure. You know, that is the new paint scheme that was introduced, say, in 1965 to prepare for the merger. Some places actually got the Pennsylvania lettering, but most of the units just got the keystones, which could be, they were decals as far as I know. They could be taken off and big PCs put on, I guess. Here we are. This is little Portland Avenue yard, which is stuffed with passenger cars. Now, I don't know anything about the history of this car. It's some kind of a hybrid, or it's been rebuilt from something else into I guess a parlor car. I never did find the history of this. I guess I could have looked it up, but the only time I ever saw a car that had this appearance, where a lot of the windows were blocked out.
Maybe it had a lunch counter.
Yeah. Well, it might have. Now, there's my friend Jim Taylor. He's the guy who would be around in case our guests needed more bourbon. But he had been there for years. I was new on the job. He'd been there for years. He knew how to do it. There's another view of Portland Avenue. It's probably 1964, with somebody's private car on the rear end, which obviously used to be a PRR car. 9304, that is a H2044 Fairbanks Morse. We had at least 2 Fairbanks Morse switchers there in Louisville, and they were being phased out, but they were almost 20 years old. So they back these trains in right up to the bumper block or the pile of snow. There's 9304 again, doing his work and putting the outbound train together. Well, here's the train ready to depart. As soon as it gets all the passengers back, this is probably 8:30 at night. So it'll be going back to Chicago or Pittsburgh in the next hour or so. Now, give you a taste of what some of the other railroads operated. Illinois Central had one very nice special that came out of New Orleans, I think. And if any of you have heard of Charlie Kastner, he was a very well-known writer in Trains magazine and elsewhere. His real real life job was manager of publicity for the L&N. And he had written several articles for Trains magazine. He told the magazine that the Illinois Central had very definitely had the best looking derby special of any of the railroads. It was pretty much all uniform. There it is being handled by a PRR switcher because they're on our railroad, but they had to come out onto the Ohio River Bridge in order to be backed into Central Station, which is about half a mile down from where I'm standing here. The IC didn't want to go into Union Station either. Well, the other railroad that ran a very classy train was the Monon from Chicago. Mr. Barringer, some of you have heard of, who was a kind of a railroad fixer. He went to several railroads and put them back in business. The Monon was one of them. The Monon, like F3s. These are F3 locomotives. I don't think the Pennsy ever had any F3s. Did they?
Yeah, they had a lot.
No, a lot of them. I don't remember them. I remember the F7s and the FP7s, which I showed you a little while ago.
Well, the F3's preceded both of them.
Okay. Well, this is on I think it's 14th Street in New Albany, Indiana, where the Monon's main line into Louisville ran right down the middle of this street for about a mile and a half. So they had big freight trains coming down the street. But Monon ran a really classy train.
I was in Purdue University colors.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And the people on this train really got treated well because on the trip back from Chicago, the next day, the train would make a side trip into the French Lick Springs Resort and stay over for a day so that these elite customers could enjoy themselves at this world-class resort, which was served only by the Monon. Well, now we're down at Union Station, where many private cars were parked. The ones that came in on the Pennsy stayed at the Portland Avenue, which is about 3 miles away from here. But many other private cars came in because the L&N brought them in. The L&N served Union Station, as did the C&O. Now, this is 1966, which was only about a year and a half after the N&W had taken over the Wabash. So this is obviously a Wabash car. So it's in their colors.
That later became PRR 1000.
Oh, it did? 1,000. We got. How did we get a hold of it? Did we buy it from the N&W?
Yeah, a little bit of a trade with Stuart Saunders.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm sure it all. There was a Pennsy car. It didn't come in on the Pennsy. It came in on some other special heavyweight sleeper. The nickel plate, as I said, the nickel plate had already been taken over by the N&W the year before, but it still had some of its own cars. Now, therefore, there is Norfolk and Westford #1, which I presume is the president's car. So he must have been here. I know the president of the Southern Railway also came, but his cars were parked out in Youngtown Yard. That's a picture of him too. So a lot of high executives would come into this big event, just to make sure that the customers knew they were there. Oh, sorry. Now this is the Chicago, and this is a assigned car to the general manager of the Pennsy in Chicago. And evidently he had come down the day before because his car came down on the rear end of the Kentucky, which was our overnight trains 94, 95 that ran between Chicago and Louisville. So I think that's whose car this was, because its name is Chicago. I saw the boss was on there. It was an L&N, very spiffy L&N office car. Now this is an L&N special that's back in. They had some of our equipment. And right along Broadway in Louisville, they had all these stub-end tracks, and they would just back these private cars up right to the bumper blocks. And the guests could just get off and do what they wanted. You know, had a private car, even though they didn't run a train in here, they had the cars. Now this group, I would like to call your attention to this group. This gentleman here was named Maury Klebold. Back in the 60s and 70s, he was famous or notorious for all of the special events, trains, private cars. He was everywhere. And of course, he ran a private car group to the Kentucky Derby. And this guy here, I don't remember his name, and he was another private car buff who would often be seen at special events. So they had chartered a car, or maybe two cars, and went out on an L&N special. So they were probably going to Cincinnati after they left here, because that's where most of the L&N specials originated, was in Cincinnati. Sorry, with old slides, they do get out of focus sometimes, and I have to. But anyway, they'd already had some libation on the car, so they were happy to pose for my picture. A couple of them still have their drinks in hand. That was quite a group. I was never a guest on one of his trips, but I heard a lot about them. Well, this is sort of the anticlimax or climax to my show, because in 1967, even though I was no longer living in Louisville, I think I was working in Pittsburgh at the time. I made a point to get out to see the Kentucky Derby specials before they disappeared. This is an L&N special from Cincinnati arriving at Louisville, and for some reason, now bear in mind that this is about 9 months before the merger of New York Central and the PRR was scheduled to occur. Here the two groups are buddying up. Mr. Perlman, the president of New York Central, had his car number 1 right here, and just ahead of it was car 120 of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was the PRR president's car, now owned by our friend Bennett Levin. So here they were, right next to each other on the rear end of the Kentucky-bound train. I told Mike, I never did find out whether Mr. Perlman was on board that NYC-1, but if it wasn't him, it might have been his family or some very distinguished guests. That's the conclusion of my Louisville show. Thank you.
Very good.
Anybody have any questions?
Frank, you covered it well. Thank you.
Very good. A lot of interesting pictures. Spectacular. Thank you so much. So that concludes our meeting unless Steve wants to add anything today. Okay.
Have a great summer and we'll see you at the fall.
Everybody have a great summer and see you on September 23rd, which is our next scheduled Philadelphia chapter meeting.